I had seen the signs along the journey, but did not yet understand what they meant. Prayers often seemed to fall on deaf ears. God's voice was hardly distinguishable from my own conscience. Incredibly moving spiritual experiences could be produced by the right combination of psychological and physiological influences. These were to form the first significant tears in my security blanket of faith. I did my best to conceal or fill these tears by immersing myself more in Scripture and learning apologetics and theology. For the first 17 or 18 years of my life, faith was about an internal struggle for me, striving to know the God I worshipped, to trust it as my guide so that I could be who I was meant to be. When I joined the church music team and became a leader in the youth group, my understanding of faith was transformed in a major way. Bringing people into worship, the turmoils of my heart and mind seemed to fade away. I came to see faith as serving others, not merely keeping my own course with God. Helping those around me became one of the most successful methods, I believed, for growing in my relationship with Christ. As a leader in the youth group, I helped with game time, kept the students behaved during the lesson, directed one of the small groups that split off after the lesson, and finally closed each night with worship songs. Twice I was asked by Trent to deliver a lesson to the youth group. The first lesson was a concoction of all the worst straw-man arguments against evolution, and the second was about staying strong in faith through times of difficulty. A year after I started as a youth leader, Trent would leave our church and move on to a bigger youth group, but I remained a prominent part of the youth group at Hope for several more years. Community and the excuses I had found from apologetics, and they are excuses, allowed me to ignore or rationalize most of the troubling matters of my faith. The rare moments when I would be presented with a challenging question, I would typically have some ready-made excuse for dismissing with it. Why does God allow evil in the world? Perhaps evil is just the absence of good or a byproduct of free will. Flawed as these responses are, I found them satisfactory at the time, enough to put my mind at ease and cause most skeptics to pause for thought. Yet the more time I spent reading about and regurgitating such excuses, the more time I had to consider their real value. They were hypotheticals, guesses. They did not get me any further away from blind faith. Instead, they became extra propositions I accepted on faith, forming a vicious cycle of assumptions, all with the purpose of justifying a preconceived conclusion. Others were not guesses, but flat-out lies. The first of these structures to crumble was my belief in young Earth creationism. Although I cannot remember how I was introduced to creationism, Answers in Genesis became one of my main resources, and I also attended a seminar led by Probe Ministries. I read about irreducible complexity in the bacterial flagellum, I knew the hoaxes of Piltdown Man and Nebraska Man, and I believed that things like the limestone cowboy boot provided evidence for rapid fossilization. But like most creationists, my understanding of evolution was pitifully misinformed. I conflated abiogenesis with evolution. I thought evolutionists believed that humans evolved from monkeys, and I had absolutely no idea of what natural selection was, thinking it was simply about survival of the strongest. When people would point out errors in my arguments, I would accuse them of misunderstanding, resort to ad hominem attacks, or generally find some way to dismiss them as not worth listening to. In high school, my biology teacher was a football coach who began the unit on evolution with a disclaimer. I don't personally believe any of this, but we're required to teach it to you so you can make up your own minds. Perhaps it should go without saying, but I can't remember learning a single thing about evolution in high school biology. I started seriously listening to the arguments in favor of evolution when I began conversing with a Christian evolutionist. All of my objections were answered patiently and kindly, and evolution was finally explained for what it is, not the straw man version put forward by the majority of creationists. I came to learn about the transitional fossils, the genetic similarities, the vestigial structures, and all the overwhelming evidence for evolution. But what seemed most significant to me was that this Christian could accept evolution and remain a Christian. Our descent from ancestral apes did not mean there was no God, nor did it have to mean that Jesus died in vain. Genesis was metaphorical, this Christian believed, and it was with the emergence of human consciousness that sin entered the world, as humans began to reject God. This new interpretation produced a number of new questions, but I could see now that evolution was a fact that I would no longer be able to ignore. This realization opened up new possibilities as well, for if Genesis could be metaphor, what else might be? I had met gays and lesbians throughout my life, and they did not seem like the evil monsters they had been portrayed as. They seemed no different from myself, and knowing that the Bible teaches that we are all fallen creatures, I had to wonder why so much emphasis was placed on the sins of homosexuals, as if Jesus could not save them when all sin is supposedly of equal offense to God. I also had to ponder why God, who is not willing that any should perish, would only establish one path for salvation. Gradually, my fundamentalist convictions started to dissolve. For years I had made a habit of Bible study by praying, opening to a random passage, and reading. This habit led me to discover many of the discrepancies I cover in my videos today. Although I had read the entire Bible before, most of the troubling passages had been glossed over or rationalized away, and a linear reading will not usually pick up on inconsistencies like a comparative reading will. Eventually I began to randomly open my Bible to verses that contradicted the previous day's study. I read in one passage of how God commanded David to take a census of Israel, and in another passage how Satan inspired David to take the census. I read of the different deaths of Judas Iscariot, the different birth dates for Jesus, and many other details. Finally, I came to face the fact that the Bible was not inerrant. Rather than mourn the loss of these dogmas, I saw it as an opportunity to mature in my faith, beyond books, beyond stories, and beyond the need for certainty and comfort. I was aware of the apologetic answers to many of these issues, but these were guesses, what-ifs, and maybes, not really solutions. Maybe Judas hung himself and the rope snapped, causing his stomach to burst open when he fell. What if there was a census in the time of Herod when Jesus was born? Sure, these things are possibilities, but are they probable? I grew tired of defending slim chances with often flimsy and fallacious reasoning. God did not need perfect scriptures to reveal himself. With a more open mind, I took up studying other religions, beyond the lame caricatures often drawn by Christian apologists. One of the things that interested me most was why Jews did not believe in Jesus. If there was allegedly so much compelling evidence that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah, why did Jews not see it? For much of my Christian life, I had assumed that the Jews were blind to the truth because of sin, or because they had displeased God, as the New Testament itself even states. I began learning about Judaism from the website religioustolerance.org, and found out their reasons for rejecting Christianity from the wonderfully simple yet informative site whatjewsbelieve.org. Further studies took me to counter-missionary resources like Jews for Judaism and Messiah Truth, as well as the outstanding book 26 Reasons Why Jews Don't Believe in Jesus. By learning more of Jewish beliefs, I started to see Christianity as a radically different take on Judaism, not an extension of it. Looking into other religions like Islam and Mormonism, I began to notice similar reliances on faith, and I couldn't help but wonder, what reason do I have for not accepting these beliefs, if I will accept the same arguments and justifications from Christianity? Christians, Muslims, and deists often all use the cosmological argument, while each thinks it points to their own specific deity. Christians, Muslims, and Mormons will attack the morality of the atheist, while each believes that the facts of our world point to the ultimate truth of their own specific religious morality. Practically all theists believe they have received some form of divine revelation from their God, and the so-called support for it is usually similar throughout all religions: inerrancy, miracles, scientific and historical accuracy, personal experience, prophecy, and on and on. Why had I picked Christianity out of the bunch? I used to believe that only the Bible had truth on its side, and all other religions revealed themselves to be fallible human creations. But the better I got at exposing the man-made nature of these various faiths, the more I began to be haunted by the appearance of similar problems within Christianity. I had no grounds for preferring any religion over the others. The culture and environment in which I was raised determined my particular brand of God belief more than anything else. This question of why Christianity played a large role in my departure from liberal faith, in addition to the daunting task of determining what was metaphor and what was literal in the Bible. I began this series with a quote: "Faith does not give you the answers, it only stops you from asking the questions." The truth of this statement was borne out in the entirety of my Christian life. I walked by faith for many years, not a blind or ignorant faith, I thought, but an informed one. Yet as this facade peeled away through study, reason, and experience, I came to realize that faith had kept my mind caged all along. It had filtered the information I received and driven me to argue against well-established facts, all to protect a cherished belief. What is the merit of faith? Why are we to turn from sight, understanding, and evidence in order to walk blindly? Religion never seems to even postulate an answer for why faith is so valued by God. It's as if we are to have faith for its own sake. Truth will not be found at the end of a journey taken solely by faith. The only reliable way to uncover truth is to ask questions, though faith teaches us to stand firm in our convictions, not being swayed by logic or evidence. The moment Peter began to pay attention to the wind and let doubt enter his mind as he walked on the water toward Jesus, he began to sink. We do not ask questions unless we have some basic doubts regarding the answers, and because faith is the suppression of doubt, it is no reliable means for finding truth. Passionate as I was in my search for truth and the belief that truth stands on its own weight, I could no longer have faith. I wanted badly to believe, but more than that I wanted my beliefs to reflect the truth. Before I finally walked away from faith, I prayed one last time that if I was turning my back on truth, I would be guided back to it. However, unshackling my mind was not an immediately freeing experience, nor did all the restraints come off at once. The road ahead of me now had different signs to consider. How would I deal with the uncertainties of disbelief that had plagued me during my first crisis of faith? What would I say to my friends and family about my change of mind? Could I handle the reactions of some who would be less than supportive? My journey through Christianity had taken me over several mountains and down several valleys, but the most harrowing part was yet to come.